Here's a question for you. Why aren't you moving to West Virginia? Might sound like a crazy question, but at the end of this presentation, you might only find it a little crazy. Now, this isn't for everybody, but I want to lay out some factoids, and I think you'll see that there's a pretty strong case for quite a few people to move to West Virginia. So, from a different presentation, I want to remind you that I proposed a few things to think about when considering where to live. This, I mean geographically, not in terms of buying a specific property. That's a different list. So, as far as cost and benefit goes, if you want to order the factors by the greatest the greatest net benefit, the first one would be growing a little food. It's something you could do pretty much anywhere, depending on your definition of little. And it's a huge benefit. The second is move away from nuclear fallout, whether that be from potential missile targets or from radioactive nuclear power plants. The next one would be to move to a sparse area, a place with a low population density. The next would be to store lots of grain, which would make sense unless you were in a place that wasn't likely to receive nuclear fallout and doesn't have a whole ton of people. The next would be to raise meat, which will take much more land than any of these other things. And then finally, to grow grain, which requires even more land and special equipment. So if you were to graph out the cost to net benefit, again, this is from a different presentation, it would look something like this, where the height of the line is the net benefit and the location on the x-axis is the cost. So growing grain is a wonderful thing to do, but it still has a really high cost compared to the benefit. Raising meat, there's more benefit there, but and a lower cost, so a higher net benefit, and we can go down from there, right? But something happens if you can take away the need to move away from nuclear fallout. This graph changes by a lot. Why? Because, as I explained in the other presentation, there are only very few places that this leaves. So if you look at the white areas here, there aren't many of them, okay? And the cost to buy land in these areas is absolutely absurd. It is so high. And the quality of the land that you get is absolutely terrible for the most part. This area is really nice. It still has super cold winters. This is Michigan and Wisconsin and Minnesota. So the winters are what you're fighting against there, and they can be pretty brutal. But as far as the East Coast goes, which is the majority of the space that's well watered, with the exception of Pennsylvania, which once you get into the Northeast, there are political considerations that could be quite considerable, including the tax situation. But anyway, you can see that it narrows down the options severely. And this is one great reason to use it as a highly prioritized discriminator. It really shrinks the search space. But it also leaves you with sites that, I could take some time and show you some what's available in Western Montana. It's atrociously bad. No normal person would look at that and say, yeah, sign me up. And it's not just my opinion. I've had this discussion with people, and I'm like, whoa, have you ever thought of moving to this? Look at this place on Zillow. And they're like, are you nuts? Yeah, you'd have to be nuts, right? And here's the population density. Okay, so what's this square I have marked on here? Well, there is a spot, actually, that it's not the worst place for radioactive fallout, okay? And population density, you can see it's kind of a less populated area as far as east of the Mississippi goes, right? It's not in this strip, at least. So that's West Virginia. And here's what happens if you take out moving away from nuclear fallout. If you're okay with this light green risk instead of the white, on this potential fallout map, here's what happens. Watch the lines. Watch how they change. So the cost of moving to a sparse area drops substantially, which means the net benefit goes way up. The cost of raising meat drops substantially. Why? You know, any of these places that you might move that has a low risk of nuclear fallout, it's super expensive to raise meat because the land, for the most part, like I said, there are some exceptions up towards the Great Lakes. The land, it doesn't rain enough. So you don't have grass. The only way to have grass is to water it. It takes 10 acres of dry land for every cow. Just using cows as an example. Obviously, there are different kinds of cattle. It takes 1 acre of land that's watered by rain per cow. That's a 10-fold increase. And guess what? Here's the shocker. So that's a 10-fold increase in the cost or the amount of land you need per cow. But here's the shocker. Land in West Virginia can be 10 to 100 times cheaper per acre than land in these nasty places. 10 to 100 times cheaper. And you don't have to irrigate. So the benefit of raising meat, the net benefit for raising meat goes through the roof because you literally just have to put them outside. I mean, there's a little more to it than that, but compared to raising cattle in the West, my goodness, it's insane. And I mean, you start to realize how insane these people are who live east of the Mississippi in suburbs. And you're thinking, what the heck are you doing? Right? And there is a need to commute, and it's so dense that you have to live close if you have an in-person job because the traffic's too bad, but you get the point. All right? So that's a huge shift. And that's how you hack this curve. These are lines, but you could draw a curve over this. I'm not doing that. It's really hard in this program. So, but you can move to a lush area, which means east of the Mississippi for the most part, with a low population density and a low land cost. But why would you accept that risk? Well, maybe foreign attack is something that's afar off, or if it comes from the grid down, because if there's a grid down, you're going to have nuclear meltdown. People don't tend to understand that, but that's the facts. You say, like, how could a nuclear power plant go into meltdown? Even barring all of the civil unrest and craziness that would accompany a grid down scenario, those sites only have so much diesel fuel to keep those plants going. And once that runs out, it's game over. It goes into meltdown. You can read details about this in Ted Koppel's book, Lights Out, which I've been recommending for more than 10 years, and I'm not sure how many people have actually read it. Anyway, maybe this is all afar off. Maybe it won't happen. Or maybe it won't be as bad as you think. And you might respond to all this by saying, but isn't this the opposite of everything you've been telling us? Yes. And so those aren't reasons I would have. But I could understand if other people had them. And I'm just going to belabor this point a little bit. I hope you permit me. The afar off part of it, quite a few people don't want to live through this stuff that's coming. And I always say, be honest. Be honest with yourself. Be honest with God. He already knows. There's no point being dishonest. And if you think you're going to die anyway, or you don't want to live through it, why wouldn't you just have a way better life until it happens? And then if I'm wrong, look at how much greater your life has been, right? So we have to be realistic about what we believe and by how much. There isn't anyone who actually believes everything that I'm saying, except for me, as far as I'm aware. And even some few people who would profess to don't actually, at least not yet. And That's fine. Everybody needs to believe what they want to believe because we are each going to be accountable for what we choose. But my point with this is to say that there's this gradient of belief of the things that I've said. And wherever you are on there, like live according to that, right? So on the one hand, don't fake to believe things that you don't believe as far as what I've said. And also don't pretend that you believe something other than what you believe in the other direction. If you really believe that things are getting worse in this country, you're not doing anything about it, and you have the ability to, you're being very dishonest with yourself, right? So just be honest. But whatever your perspective is on these things, think about it and be intentional about where you're living. That's the takeaway, okay? So, getting back to my stream of thought here, but isn't this the opposite of what you've said? Yes. But here's my reason for why you might do this, okay? One, you can't afford a property that would satisfy the constraint of foreign invasion. If this actually happens, and you really believe it will, which is already a set of constraints that might not fit you, okay? But if you do, believe that that will happen. That list of priorities that I gave you is your list. And it's the most important thing is for you to get to a place where you will be least impacted by this. Now you're going to be impacted, but what I'm saying is you want to get to a place you want to be when the grid goes down and or the bombs drop and or the armies invade. There are other things that can, and I say will happen, like a famine and a plague, but we're just comparing places like West Virginia to places like middle of nowhere Idaho right now, or middle of nowhere western Montana. So northern Idaho, western Montana, places like that, versus places like West Virginia. So both of those places would be a good place to ride out a plague or a famine if you have stored food in the West. If you don't have stored food in the West, a famine's a really big problem because it's extremely difficult to grow everything that you eat or anything near everything that you eat. Okay, so here's your other reason. You can't afford a property that would satisfy the constraint of foreign invasion. Like I said, it's 10 to 100 times more expensive per acre to get a property like that in a place like where I live. It wasn't like that before COVID, but that window is closed. And it's not coming back. It's a constant stream. Every time a property goes up for sale, it sells like hotcakes. And the price just keeps going up. Second reason is you aren't ready to do what would be required to join up with someone who can afford a property that would satisfy the constraint of foreign invasion. Now, this goes both ways, and I don't want to get too much into it, but this is a problem of people with money not wanting to share or wanting to remain in control even though they have no farm chops. Like an older person who has money but no kids. And I'll talk about kids in a second. Like they've never farmed anything. They're older. They have no kids. But they have money. In the Babylonian system, they're still calling the shots. In God's kingdom, they're not. That's sort of a gut check, I know, but that's the way it is. So I'm just, there's a lot of information to lay out, so I'm just hitting on it where I can in each presentation. On the other side of that equation, though, there will be people who are coming into this situation and they would only approach it if they could remain equals in doing so, and maybe that's not a possibility. There's an awful lot of jostling in our self-perceptions and perceptions of others as all of this goes down. It's by design. It's part of God's glory becoming more apparent, and the glory of those most like him as a part of that has to increase. They are together. You can't separate that. And so someone who I don't know. We could go through different demographics here, but one of these kind of hippie-minded, we're all even egalitarians might come into the situation thinking that there's going to be some kind of an equal commune going on. Well, guess what? The value of the decisions of each person is going to be different. The value of the work of each person is going to be different. Therefore, you can't be equal in the world's sense of equal. You can be equal in God's sense of equal, which is an equal access to consequences situation, but this turns people's expectations on their heads. It's not going to be like, oh, just random people show up and everybody's got equal benefits and equal stature. It doesn't work that way. What are you bringing to the table? That's your standing. Okay? But again, a lot more has to be said about that because it flies in the face of people's current beliefs and expectations, which are wrong. So you're not going to be ready to do what would be required to join up with someone who can. Even now, there are people who have the money to move to a place in the middle of nowhere that's barren wasteland, but is extremely survivable. And they won't do it because it's a downgrade in what they value. Like they actually like where they live right now, and they have people around that they're friends with, and they like being able to drive their kids to volleyball or whatever. And you have to let all that go and start planting trees and water them by hand every 2 weeks during the summer until they're established, and things like this that people just don't want to do it. And it's really cold and nasty in the long winters. So that's another reason to move to West Virginia, right? And I already touched on this. There are massive benefits that you can enjoy in the meantime, even if all that nasty stuff is going to happen later. If you doubt that, or you think that there's going to be a significant amount of time before it does, why not move to a place like this? Now, one reason might be because I don't want to keep moving around. It's always weird for me. I moved 18 times before I was 18, which is not normal. It's not good. Okay. But it's so weird for me to see so many people who have lived, if not in the same house, in the same area, or even the same state, their whole life. This is something that is probably going to become a relic of the past for many people, because as things go south, people will go south too, and east and north and west, okay? Movement occurs with this agitation brought on by the changing circumstances. And as I've said before, instead of thinking of one place you'll move finally, you should probably start getting your head into the mindset of what's the next place to move and for how long and why. So, all that being said, this is absolutely not the right thing for everyone. In fact, it's just a little slice of people for whom this is the right thing. Although I would say it's beneficial for most people to think through this, because this is the kind of analysis you should be doing for yourself and your family. So, first off, I would say having a young family boosts the benefit of this option. Why? Again, I talked about this in the other video I've already referred to. Homesteading is a lot of work. It's not something that someone who's never done it and is over the age of 50 can jump into and probably succeed at. And what I mean is get enough benefit out of it that it makes any sense at all to try. People like that are probably should be leaning more to, I have a little garden. And it's more of a convenience lifestyle thing, like a hobby. It's not something where you're going to be running a farm. It takes a lot of time and a lot of pain to figure these things out and to get a system going. And it tends to be really localized. There's a lot of localized learning that has to happen. Here's the pests that we deal with. Here's the plant diseases we deal with. Here are the varieties that work well here. That's an enormous problem to solve. In a place like West Virginia, I think you'd have to do less guessing, but still, those are experiments to run, and it takes work to plant a tree. It takes work to weed. It takes work to even go get eggs from the chickens. It takes work to clean out a barn. And all of these, to butcher chickens. A lot of these things can be offloaded to kids, especially the repetitive things And that's really good for them, but not so great for adults. It's not this fantasy fairy tale. It's a full-time job. And most people don't want to spend all of their discretionary time doing things like this. So having young kids is a really important thing. They benefit immensely. I just saw a study about kids who do chores, and their success rates in life they're off the charts, right? So it's wonderful to have kids in charge of animals. They learn responsibility. There are consequences if they mess up that are very obvious, and it's great. So another thing that would boost the value of this option to you is if you work remotely, or if you could. There's this surgence of tech bros, people with tech jobs that they can work remote with. And so they have money and they can work remote and they have flexible schedules. So they can go, the work that they do is creative. And so if they're really stuck on something, they can go milk a cow and come back with the answer. And if their employer is not stupid, they actually would encourage this sort of thing, because those kinds of people are more productive. And it's like, getting out of what they're doing for a second makes them more productive in doing it, if that made sense. Anyway, there are no jobs in these places. Any kind of place that fits the bill is not going to have any job that you can go apply for and get a job there, unless there's some really weird exception. By the nature of the place, it's not going to have jobs. So you have to bring your job with you. Now, there are things you can do to generate a job in these places, but it's really hard because there's no local market for anything. So like if you want to do one of these hipster cideries, like where you're making apple cider, or you want to learn how to do a sawmill and take advantage of the lumber you've got there, or you want to become a woodworker and make furniture, that's great, but you need to find a market for all of that. And what you're going to find is that you have to find a market of people willing to pay way more than market value for your products, or else you're not going to sell anything. And so that can be quite a challenge, and it's definitely not something you want to assume you can figure out before moving. It's much better to have some sort of revenue stream before moving. So for those that work remotely, that's great. All right, so what about those with equity in their homes or other access to money? So if for some reason you're a younger family, but you have equity in your house, maybe you moved into a high cost of living area and you get paid a lot, relatively speaking, so you've been able to get into a house, or you just lucked out and you got into a house before COVID, and now your equity has ballooned. Well, that's all really good news. The property values, and I'm going to show you a few of those, although you could hop on Zillow for yourself and look. The property values are low enough that you could have a fully paid off property at the end of all this, which would vastly decrease your monthly expenses. It's enormous. And by the way, that's going to keep going up because people who haven't paid off their houses can't cancel their homeowner's insurance. And that is going to keep going up. I've warned you about this time and again. If you're locked into a mortgage, that's a tail risk that you really need to worry about, because mortgage companies require homeowners insurance. Insurance companies keep losing money, and they will keep cranking that sky high. They've got you, okay? Until your house is paid off, you can't cancel that. But there are also opportunities in the midst of this, and if you're one of these families that, maybe you don't have remote work, but you really just want to gung-ho go all in on farming, and you're okay with a really low standard of living, you still might have abundant opportunities in this regard. Particularly if you're bringing to the table, I have a friend who, his family kind of had a non-traditional path as far as work opportunities and timing and things. The short story is he now operates heavy equipment like big digging machines, and he's making a lot of money per hour, which is awesome. And he lives in an area where he has this rural lifestyle. If you have skills like that people need plumbers, they need HVAC, they need mechanics, they need heavy equipment operators, and it's really hard to get people like that out there. If you can balance that with a low standard of living, and you have a piece of equipment or something, or you could get one as part of the move, that might be a very viable thing where you're not working full time per se, but because of where you live and the cost to bring people in from the city, you might actually eke out just enough to get by, or even more than that in a place like this. Or you could go hardcore farming and just say, yeah, well, I don't need fancy things. I don't want to upgrade my house. We're good living in a trailer. And then that's a really nice life if that's okay with you. Because the beauty of the place, I'm telling you, if you live in the suburbs, you can't understand the spiritual effect of getting out of that. And it's even worse in cities. It really changes everything. So anyway, another option on this is that there are rundown houses you can buy for less than $100K in West Virginia. And it's not a place that you want to stay forever, but you could look at the neighborhood and try to find a rundown house in a decent neighborhood. And then what happens is you can upgrade it to the level of the houses around it, relatively low expense, and then sell it. And if you've been in it for 2 years, there's tax benefits for that. It's basically tax-free income, whatever the difference is. But here's the benefit in this plan is that it's really difficult to buy a plot of land when you live across the country from that plot of land. You really want to get on the ground and spend time there so you can see what the seasons are like. You can see the layout of the land. You can talk to people and find out considerations. Like if you're moving to Montana, I'll tell you, people don't understand how important roof layouts are on your house. And you probably don't know what I mean. It snows so much. And if you have a roof layout where you have to shovel out in the doors in front of your garage before you leave every morning, that is a massive headache. It is a massive headache. And you never know if you're going to spend an extra hour and a half or not before you go to work. And hopefully you're not injured in some way, right? And what do you do when the kids aren't around anymore? And so if you talk to someone who has a half a brain and they've lived here before, they would tell you, look, when you're looking at a house, make sure you look for this, 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 and this. And absolutely, here's a list of no-goes, and here's a list of things that you should see as higher cost. You need to get that list together, and you're not going to be able to do that from afar. You either need to know someone that's there that's wise, or you need to live there for a little while. So there's an option where you could buy one of these crack houses and fix it up and then sell it. But you have a base of operations while you're there, so you don't have to rush into buying a plot of land. Now, again, how do you make income during that time? Because you'll get money out of it once you sell. But basically, if you don't have a house to sell getting into that, you need some source of income. If you've got remote work, that solves the problem, right? You can fix up the house while working remotely. You can buy a plot of land while you're out there. There are other financing opportunities too. The USDA has a set of loans for farmers, and they have set aside loans for new farmers. And there are other things you could do with the property as well. You might be able to get RV hookups set up in terms of electricity and septic and water before you build a house. And then you could rent those out, at least in the summer months, to help finance the project. There are many, many variables here, right? I'm just giving you a sampling. But the point is, it's not for everyone, right? It's obviously not for everyone. But here's some parting fun facts about West Virginia. There are home sites that have ponds. Imagine that. I was looking at one for $755,000, I believe. It had a 5-acre pond on a 200-acre lot. This is a wooded lot. It was absolutely stunningly beautiful. There's no house, and that's a lot of money. But for what you get for that amount in the Rockies, and that's what you have to think about, and it's mind-blowing. What you can get for that same amount in West Virginia is insane. They're also, this is a weird thing, in West Virginia, their home sites actually have free natural gas because natural gas is mined there. They have wells for it. There are places where it comes out of the ground and they've got it tapped, and you can get it for free for life. Imagine that. How's that for preparedness? This also opens up some creative opportunities for how to make money, because if you had free natural gas, are there things that you could do industrially? Are you a blacksmith? Because you can have a natural gas powered forge, and there are many, many other things. Greenhouse, you could have a natural gas fired greenhouse and grow tomatoes all year round and take those to market in Virginia and Maryland or Ohio. You could surely do that, right? You really don't have to water crops ever. I say almost never, just because sometimes there are droughts, right? But it's really rare. There are all kinds of trees you can grow that you can't grow in the Rockies. You actually have fall and spring. And if you grew up in the Rockies, you don't understand what that's like. Unless you've lived east of the Mississippi, you don't know what fall and spring are. They're actual seasons, it turns out, right? It's not like 3 days. And as part of that, you actually have a long growing season. There are shoulder crops you can grow in the spring and fall specifically. So Montana has like a half a season. Utah has almost a whole season. But in east of the Mississippi, in a lot of places in West Virginia, is a perfect spot. You can grow basically everything as long as it's not tropical. And usually you can get up to 3 crops in a season. It depends on what you're growing. But what I'm saying is that there are crops you can grow in the spring, there are crops you can grow in the summer, and there are crops you can grow in the fall. And so as far as that goes, it's kind of unbeatable. Now, I probably already made this too long, but we can go to Zillow, and you can see I was already kind of searching here. But we can go to West Virginia, and there are tons and tons of places for sale. And with Zillow, you can set filters on weird things like lot size. So let's say that you wanted at least 10 acres. And what else do we want? Let's just limit the price for now. And 100,000 just to get crazy. Okay, look at all those dots. Right? Look at all those dots of places that you can get 10 acres for less than 100. Here's 31K. Somehow I clicked on the wrong thing. Oh, that's an auction. There are a lot of fake listings on here where they put a price, even though that's not the price. That's kind of pricey. So here's 20 acres for $70,000. And the prices are going down. That's almost a 10% reduction. We can look at the pictures. This is a wooded lot. It looks like it's on a hill, which is pretty common in West Virginia and not something you really want. But these properties, we could do this for a long time, and I'm not going to waste your time with that. Here's a almost 40-acre lot. It's on a hilltop. Hilltops are bad because they're usually more rocky than flat areas because the topsoil washes down. And there's cell phone towers you probably don't want in your living room. But you can get crazy with this if you increase the price. What do we have it? Up to 100? Let's do 150, and then we'll crank up the acreage and say 20 acres. Okay? So let's see this 75,000 for 61 acres. And it has a small cabin, so you'd have a base of operations to do whatever you want to do. Look how lush and green that is, right? Oh, nice cinder blocks. But you know, depending on how many people you have, you can make this work for a minute, right? While you're building out. But look at the trees. 61 acres for 75K. That's insane. This would be at least $4 million where I live, and it wouldn't be green. Now, a lot of these places, they don't have a ton of pictures. You'd want a lot more pictures of this. it kind of looks like there might be a creek going through this. A lot of these properties have water running through them. It's not accessible by vehicle, right? Electric is nearby, so that's going to be an extra cost running it, okay? But again, the possibilities abound, and you just need to poke around and see what you can get. But it's just crazy what's available here. This one looks like it's right on a road, which is not a good idea. But there's a house already, and it's on almost 30 acres. Yep, ready to go. So I'm just trying to see if there are any extra amenities like free gas. So right there, look, 135,000. You've got almost 30 acres. There's a house you can live in. You're probably going to want to fix it up a little, but geez, right there, and it's on a road. It's probably not something I would buy for various reasons, but goodness, right? Even so a place like this, if you bought it and fixed it up, you could leapfrog or subdivide the property depending on the county regulations, and make something even nicer. But the opportunities abound is the point. We could get some raw land if maybe we should just keep poking to prove that not everything is crack house level. So this looks like raw land. Look at this pasture, giant trees, maples, oaks. You even get a picnic table. This is 26 acres for $80K. Whereas for $80,000 where I live, you'd be lucky to get 2 acres, and you wouldn't have any of this. It would just be wasteland. That's not quite a creek, but obviously there's water. So there you go. There's a creek. You can just run cows right through there. Crazy, huh? All right, well, I'm going to cut this off, but I hope I've expanded your thinking here. Just really define what you expect to happen and what you're looking for and what you're willing to do to get it. Because there are way, way, way nicer options than what you've got out there. And you're probably not living according to those opportunities. Based on the things that you value, not what I value, but even the things, whatever it is that you value. Have an open mind and take a look and take the plunge.